Hey everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create, and we're going to continue working on the Ciao 10.5 by 8.5, and here's my album here, 10.5 by 8.5 mini album featuring The Greatest Show. And in our last video, we completed page 1, and today we're going to start on page 2. All right, so just like I did on the inside cover and on page 1, I've joined two pieces of paper, and I'll show you the back here, and they're going to get laid down like so. So I'm going to give you these measurements right here. So the striped is 6 inches, and the red is 4 1/8. So 6 and 4 1/8. And actually, I need to double check. So here's, if you put a 6 and a 4 together, you're going to get 10 inches, and it actually needs to be 9 7/8. So I'm going to trim that down. So the way I like to do this is I like to oversize this slightly and then come back and dry fit it and then trim off the excess. So start with a 6 and a 4, join them together, you get 10, and then we're going to trim off just a little bit on the red side so that it fits perfectly on this. This is the pocket page here. And then we'll ink it and lay it down. So I'm just looking at all the edges to make sure it's going to fit. Okay, I'm going to put it in my trimmer. Okay, and I just trimmed it down. So now this finished piece is 7 7/8 by 9 7/8. So let's see how that looks. And that looks really good. So I am going to ink it and then go ahead and glue it and get it down. All right, so I had forgotten my my ink, so I've got that back. And I decided I needed to take a sliver. When I double checked it, it wasn't quite 7 7/8, so I needed to shave it down just a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to get my ink on. And all I'm trying to do with my ink is knock off the white edge that's created when you trim the paper, trim through the pattern paper, because it's got a white core or an off-white core. Okay, so I was getting ready to put that down, and I'm glad I didn't, because we still need to add our flaps. So here's the spine side, and here is where I wrote page 2, and all of this helps me do two things. One, keep in mind where the spine is so that I don't put a flap that's going to interfere with the hinge. And 2, to make sure the orientation is correct and that this is up and I don't install the features on this page upside down. So I have 2 flaps for this page. One rather large flap and then a smaller flap. So the larger of the 2 is 7 5/8, 7 5/8 by 6 1/8. The smaller one is 6 5/8, 6 5/8 by 4 1/4. And get my pick tool, and I'll show you. This is what's going on top of here. This clown, and then this is what's going to go over here, and I want these two to overlap slightly. So I have it designed, sorry, I gotta tuck that under, to to go like so because I want this part to go over the blankest part on this flap. So this is how I have it designed right now. Okay, so this is going to get installed on the top edge, and I'm going to look at that one more time to try to decide how much overlap I want, how far off the edge I want that. So I really don't need the flap, I just need to look at it this way. And I think I'm going to go edge to edge on both. So the larger flap is going to get installed across the top, and it's just going to be flush with the edge. And this is the pocket side. This is the spine side. And so this will be attached directly to the side too. And I'm not really worried about it getting stuck in the main part of the hinge, because if it was going this way and the flap has some movement, I'd be concerned about it, but this is the side that's actually going to be attached, so it'll be okay. I don't have to worry about that too much. Okay. Let's see my pick tool. And then once we get our flaps in, we are going to place some magnets, and that's going to keep everything closed. And I'm going to double check again where I want. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and glue this in. We're not going to put a fastener on this side, so let's go ahead and get this down. And then once that's in, we can decide how we want this to be placed. Okay, now we can try to figure out where we want this placed. And my thought process is this is kind of a void space, so I'm looking to try to place it there. I don't really want to cover this image. It's okay if it goes over this a little bit. So I'm just trying to visually come up with what I think is the best placement. And I think I like that. And for those of you that are curious, so I'm coming down about 1 inch from the top. And it'll really depend on what print you have here. If you don't cut it down the same way I did, you may want to move it up or down. So I really suggest laying it out before you make a commitment, because your results may vary. There we go. Okay, now this is ready to go ahead and put in, and then we'll open it up and work on the inside and get our magnets placed. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we're going to add some magnets. I'm going to try to put a magnet here and then I'm going to layer some of my papers and see if I can get away with just one set of magnets. But it's really going to depend on, you know, how thick the paper gets. So we will do a test run. All right. So now I know I'll have paper here, and paper here. So that's 1, 2, 3 layers that I need to test. So I'm just going to use these cards. So that would be the base paper. This would be the back of this flap. And this would be the back of this flap. So I'm just layering it in to see if the magnet will continue to have enough. Well, I got to put a magnet down first. Haha, silly. So 1, 2, 3. So I think that's going to be fine. I'm testing it. It's a little bit light. So actually, you know what? I think it's going to be too light. It is holding, but you have to remember you're going to add photos. So that would be another layer. Yeah, I think it's going to be too light. So I think we're going to have 2 magnets. One to hold the side flap and then one to hold this flap as well. And like I said, that's because we're going to add photos on top of those layers. So it's really going to get thick. Somewhere is the end of it. There it is, the tape. Okay, that's it. All right, so let's test it and everything snaps into place. Let's go ahead and get the rest of our layers in. All right, so this is going to go next. This is directional, so pay attention. And double check my direction on the front. Everything's fine. So I'm going to dry fit this one more time now that I've got my flaps in place. And it looks good. Now I'm going to turn it so I can see this outside edge a little bit better. I'm double checking my measurement out from under the camera. I think it looks really good, but it felt like it might be a little bit too long, but I'm double checking. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, I'm gonna get this tape off. Maybe. Where's my pick tool? My bone folder. Here it is. Here it is. All right. Make sure you get glue on your tape because first of all, it's the heaviest part of the paper, so it's going to want to drop down. But also, it will adhere immediately. You won't be able to wiggle it into place. So get some glue on it and give yourself a little bit of time. So the edge of these two papers didn't have tape on them, so I'm just going back and making sure there's a little bit of glue on both sides so these corners don't pull up. There we go. There we go. Okay, so I've got my inside pieces trimmed out. This is just a nice simple tan piece that's going to go here. So let's go ahead and get that down. And it looks like I forgot to ink it, so let's do that real quick. Okay, I'm using mahogany, and this is a powder puff. These are available in our shop. If you click the show more button just below this video box, in the description you'll find the list of materials used with links to our shop, and then you'll also find just below that the cut list. The cut list is a cut list for all the black components. It does not include a cut list for the designer paper. And I do that deliberately for a couple reasons. One, you may be using a different pattern for the book. And then you may want, and when I say different pattern, so for example, the cut list for color block is going to be different than a cut list for just the full pattern. So I don't include this. I will go over this as part of the video as I'm walking through it, but there won't be a detailed list as there is for the black cardstock components. All of my color blocking, oh, you know what? This is not square. Yikes. I'm gonna trim that down. Something's not right. And I see it now, putting it on my trimmer, I think. Or do I? Let's take a look. Is that better? The color blocking that I do visually. So it's not something I pre-measure. I actually do it with you guys when we're walking through it, for the most part. This I did last night, and I'll give you this estimate when we're ready to install it, but I would not recommend trying to pre-cut for color blocking. I think it's something that you need to do as you go. It's pretty easy to pre-cut. I still need another sliver off these if they're solid units, because all you're doing is taking this panel, subtracting the 1/2 inch hinge, and then reducing it by 1/8 width and 1/8 height. And that will give you a 1/16 inch. It's too much. Border. Sorry, I thought I had dry fit this last night. It wasn't quite right. Now it's right. Okay. And some of my dry fitting is necessary because I just don't have any pieces large enough to cover the panels, so I color block to compensate. Shoot. I'm saying shoot because I put this down and I forgot to ink the edge, but I'm going to let it go because it's a light piece of paper anyway. But when I just trimmed it down a little bit, I forgot to go back and ink that edge. So, all right. So now here is the piece that's going to go on top, and I'll share with you what the sizes are. But again, it's really going to be up to you on what patterns you put together and what pieces of scraps you have left over. So this piece right here is 2 1/8. And this is about 5 inches. And if I was doing it, I would oversize this slightly, put them together, and then come back and trim off the edges to make it fit. Okay? That is my normal practice when color blocking. I think you get a much cleaner edge. You'll be happier with the results. Okay. Looks good, so I'm taking off all my tape. We're about ready to glue it down. Shoot. There. You have to be careful because where you've laid the tape down on this little hinge area, it's really floppy, so it's easy to fold over on itself. Okay. And that is the end of page 2. Get my glue cap on. All right, so that's the end of page 2. And then I think I'm going to come back and put a strip here on all of the pages. I don't have the strips cut out right now, and I want to do something that's a slight contrast, so I don't know what it's going to be. But for now, I'm just going to call this done, and we're going to set page 1 and 2 aside. And now we have page 3, which will complement, there's our page 3 base, which will complement page 2. So it's another extension of the clown papers, like so. All right. Okay, so I'll give you the measurements. 6 5/8, 6 5/8 by 7 1/8. 6 5/8 by 7 1/8, and this is 6 5/8 by 5 1/8. 6 5/8 by 5 1/8. You're going to score a half inch on the 6 5/8 side. So let's see, what had I decided here? So I believe my plan was to install these two flaps on the edges as well, like so, and then I think I'm going to have the large flap go over the small flap. So I'm going to center both of these just on the edges. Okay, so I'm going to do that visually. And that looks like about 3/8 of an inch on either side, but just center your panel. And I need my pick tool. Okay. I'll show you my contrast. So there it is. It's installed right along the edge, centered. And now we're going to do the same thing on this side. Right along the edge and centered. And I'm placing it on my grid. And I can see this is 8 inches across, and I'm using that to help me center this. And I'm not worried about precision. Okay, let's go ahead and get the top flaps in, since I know I'm not going to be putting any magnets on the top side. I'm dry fitting. Okay. Looks good, but it doesn't look quite square. So I'm going to, no, it's good. Get some glue on it, get it down. So this is a pretty simple flap design throughout the whole album, and the reason is there's four really strong pattern pages that have design elements that pretty much cover the whole page. And so I've chopped those down so that they wind up being distributed on 2 flaps, but you still get the gist of the 12 by 12. And part of the reason the flap design is simple is because I didn't want to cut these, I didn't want to cut through some of these images, like the clowns, for example. So there's 4 of those pages, and hence the sort of large and simple flap design. I think it lends itself to the design of the paper itself. That's also why every single page is different, because I actually trimmed and designed my flaps around the pattern. So in some cases this pattern was larger, in other cases it was smaller. So that is where my thought process was coming from. Okay, now I'm gonna get the cap on my glue real quick, and then we're gonna do some magnet placement. And then we've got just 3 more pieces to lay down. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did on the other one. I'm gonna use 2 sets of magnets, because I think once we get all the paper in and photos, the small magnets aren't gonna be strong enough to go through all those layers. Oops, that was 2 magnets, I think. Yep. There we go. Okay, there's one. Actually, I'm going to try it with 3. I'm going to add some layers in here and see how that does. Okay, let's add we'll add a layer for the base cardstock, a layer for the back here, and a layer for back here, 2 photos. And it still feels pretty strong, so I think you can actually get away with 3 magnets, provided they all stack on top of each other. Now the issue with that is it's 1 less magnet, but you have a lot more bulk this way. So it's really, I think, a preference. So if you're concerned about having 3 magnets stacked on one another and the height, then I would say to move this magnet up a little bit, and your second magnet's going to be somewhere around here. But I'm gonna leave it this way. So I believe this is planned for here. Yes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the two measurements here. So this is 6 inches by 5 inches. Join them and then trim it down to fit. Okay. All right, so now we're ready for the large panel here. And it needs to be trimmed down. So I started with a 4x6, so this is 6 and this is 4 inches wide by 7 7/8. And I'm going to trim it down to 9 7/8, and I'm going to take it off the red side. Okay, let's see how we did. Okay, I'm going to ink my edges. Okay, let me turn this sideways so I can see a couple of the edges this way. Okay, and as I mentioned, I'm probably going to come back and put a trim piece on all the joins in the book, but I'm going to leave this as it is now. And there is the